Aloha, YouTube friends! You probably don't know, but Mrs. Tiki Envy is a 4th grade teacher in our home state of California. Part of her curriculum each year is to study the history of California and the California missions. In the summer of 2024, we went on a road trip and visited each of California's 21 missions, plus Fort Ross. We learned about the native peoples, the Spanish soldiers, and Father Junipero Serra and his priests. In between, we stayed at some of our favorite campsites, and we enjoyed a few tiki bars. We called it our Priests and Pagans tour. We hope you enjoy this video remembrance of our journey. Mission San Juan Bautista was founded June 24, 1797 by Father Fermin Francisco de Lausen. It is named for John the Baptist. He stands here in front of the mission, gesturing towards heaven. The base of the statue directs us to Luke 1, 78 through 79. Because of the tender mercy of our God, by which the rising sun will come to us from heaven, to shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the path of peace. Both the city of San Juan Bautista and this plaza are named after the mission. We have a huge model of the San Juan Bautista mission here, but they're working on it. Sanctuary. The Ohlone and Yokut people were baptized here at Mission San Juan Bautista and became neophytes. Native Americans room. This room shows artifacts from the Native Americans. It also displays photographs of some neophytes after they've been baptized into a European lifestyle. So San Juan Bautista was known as the Mission of Music. It's the 15th mission, and they had a choir of Native American boys who performed for visitors, and they also had a little orchestra here. Father Pedro Esteban Tapiz taught singing to the Native Americans. He used a Spanish notation system which varied color and texture for polyphonic music. Very interesting. He's buried here somewhere on the grounds. We'll see if we can find him. Here is one of the scores Father Tapiz may have used at Mission San Juan Bautista. 2 of his handwritten choir books are preserved at the mission. There is also a unique music stand on display. So it's a music stand that would hold a dove that'd be released on Pentecost Sunday. Now that's a music stand. Look at the size of this thing. It's huge. I guess that is the door for the dove to come out. We did not find Father Tapiz's grave marker. We learned later it's near the altar, but we did go into the mission's cemetery, which contains the remains of 4,000 natives and Europeans. Here is the cemetery, San Juan Bautista. Just don't slip, because it's on a hillside. And you can see California's agriculture out there. Pretty impressive. These are original tile floors, and how can you tell? There's animal prints right there from when they were drying. This church is unique because it has 3 aisles. 1, 2, 3. And it's the only one of all the churches. All the missions now have 3. The arches, which separate the center from the two side aisles, were destroyed in an earthquake in 1812. The Fathers filled them in, but in 1975, a restoration reopened them. Mission San Juan Bautista has served Mass daily since 1797. Looking down on the services from the top row of the altar are St. Anthony, St. Dominic, and St. Francis of Assisi. On the bottom left is Sant Isidro, and on the right is St. Pascal Babylon. In the middle, of course, is the mission's namesake, St. John the Baptist. Another sacred space at the mission is the Chapel of Guadalupe. It is the oldest surviving building on site, devoted to religious services, and boasts several of the mission's apostolic paintings. San Juan Bautista has the most complete collection in the mission chain. We're in the Chapel of Guadalupe. It's kind of closed off, but you get an idea for it. What a beautiful room. And on this hot day in July, it's air conditioned, which is good. In addition to the sacred spaces, the museum at Mission San Juan Bautista features many other rooms and displays. The mission was secularized in 1835 and seized by the Mexican government in 1895. This room is staged as it would have looked after secularization in the 1850s when Patrick and Margaret Breen lived here. The Breens were members of the ill-fated Donner Party and arrived penniless at the mission after their ordeal. They were given free shelter. In 1848, one of their 7 children set out for the goldfields and returned with $10,000 in gold dust, about $404,000 today. San Juan Bautista. The church was reconsecrated by the Catholic Church in 1859 and restored in 1884. The mission is built on the San Andreas Fault, and in 1906, the famous San Francisco earthquake ruined the outer church walls and other buildings. It was restored again in 1949. In 1958, the mission and its grounds were featured prominently in the movie Vertigo. Note the steeple in the far right of the photograph. It was added after the mission's original construction. Steeple cross, which used to be on the steeple, but now is in the museum because the steeple had been destroyed by a fire. Alfred Hitchcock added it back for his movie using scale models, matte paintings, and trick photography. The tower in Vertigo does not resemble the original steeple. There is no longer a steeple at the mission, but the 3-bell campanario was restored in 2010. Father Lawson devoted Mission San Juan Bautista by saying, "In the name of our Blessed Father, and the saint whose feast we commemorate today, St. John the Baptist." If you visit Mission San Juan Bautista, it's bound to leave quite an impression on you too. Be sure to exit through the gift shop. After touring Mission San Juan Bautista, we went on one of the longer drives we took on this trip to our next campsite at the Puerto Bodega RV Park. Before making camp, though, we stopped at a new tiki bar in Petaluma, California called Capu. They had great music, drinks, and decor. They even had this themed pinball room with Chinese dragons on the wall. We'll be going back to Capu. Back in Bodega Bay, we went to bed and got ready for Fort Ross. Okay, go. Fort Ross is a Russian fort that was in use from 1812 until 1841. Ross is a poetic name for Russian in the Russian language, so Russian fort. Why a video about a Russian fort in the midst of California missions? Timing and competition between the countries of Russia and Spain. The fort was founded after Mission San Juan Bautista in 1797, but before Mission San Rafael in 1817. It was also a driving force behind the founding of the last mission in Sonoma, Mission San Francisco Solano, in 1823.
All right, here we are at Fort Ross. The Russians are coming down from the north, and the Spanish are coming up from the south. And the Spanish didn't want the Russians to get any further south, and so they were putting all those missions up, and they had all the soldiers with them. Anyway, the Russians were here on the coast, hunting for fur, and maybe laying claim to California.
This building, by the way, is a windmill, very likely the first one built west of the Mississippi. The blades are no longer on it, but the model inside the museum shows what it would have looked like when it was in use, stamping bark and grinding grain into flour. Before Fort Ross was established, Russian expansion moved across Siberia and into the northern Pacific. British and American fur trade companies had also established a coastal presence in the Pacific Northwest. As they moved south, the Russians and Spanish met along the coast of Alta California. Fort Ross was established as the hub of the southernmost Russian settlements in North America in 1812, and Spain, that had already established 18 missions in California, did not want to see them move any further south. Before the Russians and the Spanish, however, the people from the top land lived in this coastal area for thousands of years. When the Russians arrived in 1812, more than 1,500 native peoples controlled a territory of at least 50 miles along the coast and 30 or more miles inland. They had complex systems of exchange with the surrounding communities with whom they traded for food, services, and other necessities. The village where Fort Ross was built was called Maytini. In 1803, the Russians first came to the Sonoma County coast on American fur trade ships. The Americans had made a deal with Alexander Baranov, a Russian trader and merchant, to hunt seals using Russian supervisors and native Alaskan hunters. In 1806, Nikolai P. Rezanov, an official of the Russian-American Company, and his translator, Georg von Langsdorff, sailed to San Francisco to explore trade with the Spanish commandant. The physician and biologist von Langsdorff was a corresponding member of the Russian Imperial Academy of Sciences, and his memoirs present a classic account of early Spanish California. His sketches of the Native Americans, their tools, and California wildlife are some of the earliest portraits of native life to have survived. These early explorers reported the sparsely populated coast back to Russia, and Russian ambassador Nikolai Rezanov recommended to Baranov that a settlement be established north of Spain's most northerly site in San Francisco. In 1812, Russians landed at Bodega Bay and named the Slavic River. We now call it the Russian River. Soon after, their leader Ivan A. Kuskov moved the group up from Bodega Bay to the inlet of the site that would become Fort Ross. He hoped the new settlement would provide food for Alaska and fur to enrich the Russian-American Company. As they had done in other new settlements, they immediately built fortifications. Just like the missions, the fort was built in the form of a quadrangle, about 300 feet square and enclosed by a redwood wall with 2 blockhouses at opposite corners.
Apparently the Russians believed in peace through strength, right? With this idea of a quadrangle that the Spanish had, the Russians had the same idea. They just used fencing here to keep people out. Probably the Spanish and the natives. There's one blockhouse. Across the way is the other.
From the fort's 2 blockhouses, any attacker could be put under a deadly barrage from Russian cannons.
It seems apparent that the Russians were very keen on keeping their fort and their interests in California.
They established themselves with such strength that the Spanish realized they had no hope of evicting them from Alta California, what they considered New Spain. The cove below is where Russian ships would have been anchored. Kayaks were dried on racks above the beach. Within the enclosure of the quadrangle was the home of the director, barracks, stores, and a chapel. Outside the fort were the company's cattle barns, housing for the Native Americans, and 2 rows of private company homes, which had their own orchards and gardens, 59 buildings in all. Colony Ross referred to the area from Point Arena to Tomales Bay, and by 1830, 3 small farming communities called ranchos near Grayton, California, Salmon Creek Valley, and on the Russian River had been established. With the help of native Californian and Aleut labor, the Russian settlers at Fort Ross became basically self-reliant. Between 1816 and 1823, they built 4 ships and also skiffs, longboats, and barges. Company employees made barrels and weapons.
Well, we reached the armory. Russian soldiers were ready.
They forged iron, cast brass, and repaired guns and other equipment. At Bodega Bay, they fired bricks, shipping 12,000 to 18,000 back to Sitka, Alaska.
Couple bedrooms.
This settlement was the center of manufacturing in California. Its products and repair services found ready customers in the Californios. The company also had a robust lumber industry, shipping boards, beams, and planks to customers in California and the Hawaiian Islands. They could even ship entire houses, which they would build and then ship disassembled. By 1817, the sea otters had been eliminated due in part to Russian hunting, but Russians also did good in California, like bringing the first vaccine to Monterey in 1821. Many European inventions also came from the Russians, like glass windows, stoves, and all-wood housing. From 1824 to 1836, Mexico and the Russians at Fort Ross were involved in a complex and sometimes confrontational relationship. In 1834, Mexican Governor Jose Figueroa granted Rancho Petaluma to Mariano Guadalupe Vallejo, and in 1835 made him the highest military commander in Northern California. He encouraged Vallejo to build the Presidio of Sonoma next to Mission San Francisco Solano in 1836 to discourage the Russians from settling any further south. In 1839, John Sutter was given land in the Central Valley from Mexican Governor Juan Bautista Alvarado for the sake of curtailing American, Indian, Russian, and British encroachment in Alta California. By then, Fort Ross's agricultural importance had decreased, and fur-bearing marine mammals had been overhunted. The property was acquired by the state of California in 1906. Today, most buildings are reconstructions. The only original structure left is the Rotchev House, the Commandant's house. Fort Ross is a fascinating stop within the history of the missions and the state of California. Mission San Francisco Solano in Sonoma, California, is the 21st of the California missions. It is the end of the Mission Trail and the 300-year history of Spanish and Mexican settlement in California.
This is Sonoma Mission. Mission San Francisco de Solano.
Before the mission, this land was home to the Coast Miwok, Southern Pomo, Wapo, Suisunis, and Patwin peoples. They were known for their skilled basket weaving and reliance on the natural resources in the area, including fishing and hunting. The mission was founded July 4, 1823, and is named for St. Francis Solanus, a missionary to Peru in the 1500s. This last mission is unique because it is the only mission founded after Mexico's independence from Spain and without prior approval of the Church. The driving force behind the Church's founding is Father Jose Altamira. He had been working at Mission San Francisco de Asís, but didn't care for it, and he decided to found his own mission. He received permission from Governor Don Luis Arguello due to the governor's own agenda. Arguello wanted to block the Russians at Bodega Bay and Fort Ross from moving any further inland. He and Father Altamira worked together to propose moving both San Francisco de Asís and the San Rafael Asistencia into the new mission in Sonoma. Work on the new mission was halted on order from Father Presidente de Sarria because the diocese felt the era of the missions was coming to a close. Work was allowed to resume when it was agreed that Mission San Francisco de Asís and Mission San Rafael would not be closed, and instead, Mission San Francisco Solano would become the 21st California mission. The domestic chores done at all the missions also took place at Mission San Francisco Solano, even on windy days.
Today at the mission, it's about 100 degrees out here. I can only imagine making bread in a fire like this, oven like that. Make it a little warm. Here are the barracks in Sonoma.
The mission is located across the street from the Sonoma Military Barracks, built in 1836 by General Vallejo for Mexican troops. It is here where the first bear flag was raised over California on July 14, 1846, proclaiming California a republic and independent from Mexico. In 1833, in a move to remove all Spanish influence from Alta California, Mexico secularized Mission San Francisco Solano and all the other missions. In 1834, the mission was closed, and Mariano Vallejo, commandant of the Presidio of San Francisco, was named administrator. The mission fell into disrepair. Sonoma was growing, and people stole building materials from the mission's ruins, which led to further degradation of the building. In 1841, a small adobe chapel was built to replace the original that had collapsed. That building was destroyed by the 1906 earthquake, but this building was restored in the 1940s. The interior of the chapel is now patterned after the interiors of mission churches, which were decorated by the neophytes. Some of the wall paintings depict the architectural features found in the great Baroque cathedrals of Mexico and Spain, as seen next to these sacred statues. Other decorations are stylized representations of nature, such as hills, flowers, and running streams. The eye above the altar is referred to as the eye of heaven, which the Father said allowed God to keep a watchful eye on the church. The 14 Stations of the Cross and other framed paintings are authentic mission period relics. In 1863, President Lincoln transferred ownership of Mission San Francisco Solano back to the Roman Catholic Church. In 1881, the property was sold to a businessman and a new parish church was built across town. In 1903, remaining buildings were bought by the California Historic Landmarks League and by 1913 had been restored. Today, Mission San Francisco Solano has the authentic contours devoted to the mission's rich history and to the history of all the missions in the state of California. On our way back to Bodega Bay from Sonoma, we stopped at the Union Hotel in Occidental, California for an Italian dinner. The cooler weather in Bodega Bay was excellent for sleeping that night. Since we had now been to the most north mission, the next day we started heading south towards Mission San Rafael and eventually home again. Mission San Rafael Archangel is named after the angel of bodily healing. This is entirely fitting because it was established as an asistencia, or helper, to Mission Dolores and the ill Northern California natives devastated by the inclement weather of San Francisco. It was founded on December 4, 1817, by Father Jose Vicente de Sarria. Within a year, there were 300 sick natives here, and in October of 1822, it was decided it could become a mission in its own right. Mission San Rafael was the first mission to be secularized by the Mexican government, and by 1844 it had been abandoned. It was sold in 1846 for $8,000. The mission was used by John Fremont as his headquarters during the Bear Flag Revolt, and by 1861 the buildings were in disrepair. In 1870, all the mission's buildings were razed. Only a pear tree from the original mission's orchard remained. In 1909, the Native Sons of the Golden West began the replacement of the mission when they erected a bell and a sign on the original site. In 1940, a Hearst Foundation grant allowed for a replica of the original 1818 structure to be built. It is one of the smallest missions and is overshadowed by the tower of the adjacent Church of St. Raphael. Mission San Rafael Archangel may have a window like Mission Carmel, but where Mission Carmel is one of the most impressive of the missions in the chain, Mission San Rafael is known as the most obliterated of California's missions.